Hello a chroeso cynnes iawn I chi gyd. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Rachel Garside and I recently joined the CHERISH Project as their PR and marketing manager. I'm very pleased to be joining such an enthusiastic team. Mae CHERISH, sef hinsawdd treftadaeth ac amgylcheddau rhifau, ynysoedd a phentiroedd, yn brosiect 6 mlynedd ar gyfer Iwerddon a Chymru sy'n cael ei gyllido gan Ewrop, ac mae'n dod â 4 partner ar draws 2 wlad at ei gilydd, Comisiwn Brenhinol Henebion Cymru a Phrifysgol Aberystwyth yma yng Nghymru, a'r rhaglen darganfod a chanolfan archaeoleg ac arloesi Iwerddon ac arolwg daearegol Iwerddon. Nod y cynllun yw cofnodi effeithiau newid hinsawdd ar ein treftadaeth arfordirol, cyn bod nodweddion hanesyddol fel ceiri pentir a llongddrylliadau yn cael eu colli. CHERISH stands for Climate, Heritage and Environments of Reef, Islands and Headlands. It's a 6-year EU-funded project between Wales and Ireland. There are 4 partners involved, 2 in Ireland, the Geological Survey of Ireland, and the Discovery Programme, and here in Wales, Aberystwyth University and the Royal Commission of Ancient and Historic Monuments. The aim is to study the effects of climate change on our coastal heritage and create a permanent record of important features like hill forts and shipwrecks before they're lost to the waves. I was lucky enough recently to go out on a field trip with the team to see an intertidal shipwreck being surveyed at Marloes in Pembrokeshire. But for this talk, we're going a little further offshore to hear about another wreck, the Bronze Bell. Mae'n bleser croesawu Alison James I siarad gyda ni I glywed am hanes Longddrylliad y Bronze Bell. We're delighted to be joined for this talk by Alison James. Alison is a director at the specialist coastal and marine contractor MSDS Marine. Before that, she was a maritime archaeologist with Historic England. She's a trustee and tutor with the Nautical Archaeology Society and is a highly experienced diver, specialising in scientific and archaeological diving. Ond cyn clywed gan Alison, gair I atgoffa bod croeso I chi ofyn cwestiwn. Mae'r opsiwn I ofyn cwestiwn ar y bar ar waelod y sgrin. Danfonwch eich cwestiwn ac fe fyddwn ni'n cynnal sesiwn holi ac ateb yn dilyn y cyflwyniad. Just before we hear about Alison's adventures visiting the Bronze Bell, a reminder that you can ask questions via the Q&A function, which should be in the bar at the bottom of your screen. Please type your questions here and I'll put them to Alison at the end of the talk. We're also being joined this evening by Julian Whitewright, who is a maritime archaeologist with the CHERISH Project. He'll be available to answer questions as well. But for now, I should also mention that this session is being recorded. So that, without further ado, over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Rachel. Right, well, thank you for joining us this evening to find out more about our work on the Bronze Bell wreck. As Rachel said, I'm Alison James. I'm a manager at MSDS Marine. And in 2021, we were commissioned by the CHERISH Project to undertake a programme of diving on the Bronze Bell protected wreck site. Whilst previous project work by CHERISH has included marine geophysics, the project represented their work being undertaken underwater by diving archaeologists for the first time. The wreck was last visited by an archaeological contractor, Wessex Archaeology, in 2004 as part of a wider government contract of work on protected wreck sites. So it had been a long time since a contractor had been on the site. However, that doesn't mean work hadn't taken place since 2004. Since then, Ian Cundy and Bill Turner of the Malvern Archaeological Diving Unit, or MADU, have done a huge amount of work on the site, and we were delighted to be able to have Ian visit us during our project to share his knowledge of the site. And I'd like to thank him now for his help and support that he has given us in the last year. In addition, our visit was the first to assess the impact of climate change on the wreck, and I'm going to talk about that in the next half hour, as well as bringing you up to date with the work we've done. And I hope that by the end of it, you're going to be as excited about the site as we are. So where is the wreck? Well, it's located very close to shore. It's only about 450 metres off Benar Beach. It's in 10 metres of water. It's on a mainly sandy seabed, and it was first discovered in 1978. A local man, Geraint Jones, had originally observed material washing ashore on the beach, and over a period of time, he concluded it must be coming from a wreck. And the wreck in question was subsequently discovered by divers from Glaslyn and Harlow Sub-Aqua Club, who later became the K-Nest group to excavate the site. Geraint quickly learnt to dive as well, though, so he could join the group. It's sometimes called the Talybont wreck due to its proximity off the coast to the village of Talybont. It's also, perhaps more famously, known as the Bronze Bell wreck due to this beautiful bronze bell with a date on it of 1677 that the divers found on the site during the early days of their excavation. The wreck potentially appears on this chart that was produced as a result of a survey by cartographer Lewis Morris between 1741 and 1744. In what appears to be the same hand as the rest of the map, there's a small note saying here the wreck of a Genoese ship of about 700 ton lies, lost 1709, laden with marble and paper. And you can see that note on the map there. And indeed, the cargo that we see on the seabed at the wreck site is marble. You can see it in these underwater shots. It's very visible. Originally, there were 43 blocks on the site weighing an estimated 65 tons. It's unfinished Carrara marble, and it sits proud of the seabed. And it does seem to indeed suggest that the 1709 wreck on that map is indeed the wreck that we're working on and is known now as the Bronze Bell wreck. The marble blocks range in size from 80 centimetre cubes to much larger blocks, nearly 3 metres long. As well as being a trade centre for Carrara marble in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, Genoa was an important paper-making centre of early modern Europe. There are several theories as to why such a trade ship was in the area, one being that it missed the entrance to the English Channel and was actually bound for London, or that it might have been destined for the port of Bristol, which at the time was the second largest port in England, and perhaps missed the Bristol Channel and ended up where it is today. We know from wharfage accounts that vessels travel from Genoa to unload cargo at Bristol, although another possible destination could have been Dublin, so that there's lots of potential places this ship was going. Between 1701 and 1714, Europe was at war as part of the War of Spanish Succession with France and Spain against the Grand Alliance, which was made up of England, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire. During this time, the Republic of Genoa was an important transportation and supply port for thousands of troops and traders from both sides. The Genoese were autonomous, and therefore they could have stopped in a French port on the way to pick up further trade goods before heading to Britain. And that could account for the presence of both French coins and pewter on what is potentially a Genoese vessel. If you visited Barmouth, you might have seen this sculpture that's on the slide there on the edge of the quay. The block it is carved from was recovered from the wreck and then carved by a local sculptor, Frank Coxey, to celebrate the millennium. It's called the Last Haul, and it represents 3 generations of fishermen pulling in a net. A large amount of finds from the site are now on display at the T. Gwyn Museum in Barmouth. If you haven't been there, then it's really worth a visit next time you're in the area. I was really impressed to see so many of the finds from the wreck on display. The K-Nest group did a wonderful job with the conservation of material they recovered. The wreck itself is designated under the Protection of Wrecks Act 1973 on account of its archaeological significance. This means that a licence issued by CADU on behalf of government is required to dive on the site. During our work, before we got started, we were lucky enough to meet one of the original team members who I've already mentioned, Geraint Jones, the day before fieldwork started. It was wonderful to hear from him about his time diving the site and all the work that was undertaken by him and the K-Nest group. If you watch the first of our daily dive diaries, and I'll talk about those more later, there are some clips of Geraint talking, so do watch them. He's now keen that a new generation of divers come forward to enjoy the site and continue all the work that has taken place since it was discovered. So the last visit of an archaeological contractor to the site, as I said, was Wessex Archaeology in 2004. There's been visits since by Madhu, who've been surveying the wreck. But CHERISH tasked us with completing an updated survey of the site using both traditional survey techniques and photogrammetry, as well as undertaking a baseline assessment of the site to enable the effects of climate change on the wreck to be better understood in future. It was also important the project provided a programme of public engagement and outreach. Public engagement is really central to everything we do at MSDS Marine, and the same is true of CHERISH. We believe that wherever possible, communities should be engaged with maritime archaeology projects. Communities that feel included can be its most powerful champions, supporters and custodians. We find that people are always fascinated by shipwrecks. As archaeologists and divers, we're lucky enough to be able to access these sites, and it's really important that we share what's below the waves and out of sight with many people with a wider audience. And I'll talk a bit about that later. So, whilst the site is close to the beach and therefore accessible with a small inflatable boat, it's not really ideally suitable for access by a full archaeological dive team who aren't renowned for travelling light. We seem to take an awful lot of equipment with us. Access for diving with a hard boat is then from Barmouth or Pwllheli harbours. Barmouth is tidally dependent and care must be taken below half tide, especially during periods of strong southwesterly winds and ebb tides. Pwllheli is further from the site, but it is fully accessible at all states of this tide. And as a result, Pwllheli was chosen as the base for our fieldwork. This meant a longer drive to work to each day, but being able to stay on site as long as we wanted, and the beautiful journey with views across to Snowdon, often accompanied by dolphins alongside the boat, meant that it was more than worth it. Diving was undertaken from the diving support vessel CCAT-C, which is operated by John Shaw, who you can see in the picture here. It's an MCA Category 2 workboat that can carry up to 12 people. And as you can see from the pictures, it's got a large wheelhouse at deck level with a really large deck area, which makes it great for archaeological diving projects. You can see all of our equipment stowed on the deck in that aerial shot. And as you can see, there's still loads of space. It's a really good work platform. So we were very lucky to have an excellent team for this project. I'm going to start my little video there. Sorry, it didn't start. Diving was supervised by Mark James and the dive tracking was run by Phoebe Wild. Tom Harrison is our in-house equipment maintenance technician and one of our dive team. We had Felix Pedrotti, a photogrammetry specialist, Jessica Mitchell, a professional underwater camera operator who more normally works for people like the BBC, Jenny Kent, Simon A.D. Davis, they're two of our divers. They were also part of the 2004 Wessex Archaeology team, which really enables us to compare the site now to how it was then. And in addition, we had George Hopkins and Oliver Pitts with us, and they're not divers or archaeologists, but they are incredibly skilled camera and drone operators, and they took charge of the video production side of things to enable daily dive diaries to be broadcast during fieldwork. Any video clips I use today are the result of their work and Jessica's underwater footage. The success of the project is very much due to the team and their specialist skills and their ability to work together. And so to really highlight that, I'm going to use some of the footage of the team talking about their work during this evening's presentation. So, prior to fieldwork, the most recent multi-beam data survey of the site, which was undertaken by the CHERISH Project in 2020, was geo-referenced and loaded into the project's GIS workspace. This allowed us to create an updated site plan in advance of the fieldwork that divers were then able to ground truth once we got to site. The first dive, though, was for our divers was a simple familiarisation dive to scout the site and understand how what was visible on the seabed compared to the existing site plans. This site plan you can see now shows the multi-beam overlaid with the 2004 Wessex site plan, which is the red outline you should be able to see, alongside the updated 2021 site plan, which is our site plan, which is in a sort of like greeny bluey colour. Diving was all undertaken on scuba, and we were able to get 3 teams of 2 divers in a day, giving us well over 6 hours bottom time on the seabed. As you can see in these photos, we were blessed with beautiful sunny weather, apart from the first day, which was great, very windy and very lumpy, and we won't talk about because it wasn't really a pleasant day on site. But while sunny weather definitely makes working on a project like this more enjoyable, it does provide additional challenges to keep divers hydrated and out of the sun as much as possible, especially when they're sat in their kit, ready to get in the water and just waiting for the supervisor to tell them they can go, like Jenny is in this photo. So acoustic tracking was used throughout diving fieldwork activities. I'm going to let Project Officer Phoebe Wild now talk about the system and explain how it works.
Hi, I'm Phoebe. I'm a project officer with MSDS Marine. I'm here on this job to operate our Sonodyne acoustic tracking system, which allows us to track our divers on the seabed. So what we have are a series of beacons that we clip onto divers when they go down, and we turn on their tracking and we can see them on the screen where they're going. It produces a little line, the dots around our beautiful site plan that we created using the multi-beam that was taken recently in 2020. The multi-beam is incredibly clear, so we've been able to use that to create an actual site plan showing the position orientation of guns and anchors, which is quite fantastic because it allows us to ask the divers down who are on the seabed questions about the anchors and cannon they're sitting on. So for example, I can send Tom down and I'll say, Tom, what's the orientation of this? What condition is it in? What marine growth is growing on it? Is there any concretions? Can you give me some measurements? And he can do all of that via the comm system, and I can just write it straight into the attribute table on our project, which allows us to live record all details about the cannon and the anchors while it's happening, rather than Tom having to come up and remember everything.
The anchor that you're on, there's a cannon alongside it, or it's either slightly over it or slightly under it.
Yeah, I'm on the go now.
The tracking system is also good because on sites where there's poor visibility, it allows us to make sure we can guide our divers around the site to where we want them to go. Here it's less of an issue because the water's so clear and the visibility's so good, but on sites with less visibility, it's good because the divers are blind and we're leading them essentially using the system. So it's incredibly clever the way that it works. We've been tinkering with the GPS a little bit, but it's incredibly quick and easy to mobilise, which makes it really, really efficient.
Firstly, we have a GPS unit up here. This knows where it is via satellite. At the bottom of this pole is a transducer that knows where it is via motion sensors and compass, and between these items we can acoustically track divers on the seabed. These two items here are wired into this box over here. So this unit is able to send a ping out through the transducer, which will ping to one of these on the seabed, which will be connected to a diver. That ping will go back through these units, back into this box, and then this box via Wi-Fi transmits all the information into the computer in the cabin.
We use a program called Ranger 2, which is produced by Sonodyne. We can then use the data that we put into the system to overlay the actual live track system on top of the site plan that we've created.
So that was Phoebe talking about the acoustic tracking, but how did the diver tracking help us? Well, the 2004 visit had achieved some excellent photos at key points on the wreck. And a key aim of our visit was to identify the locations on the site where these images were taken and the direction in which they were taken. And we were able to do that to some extent before we arrived on site by comparing the images to the existing site plan. And if you look at the plan of the site here, you'll see a series of yellow arrows with numbers next to them. And these show the location where and the directions in which the 2004 survey photos were taken. Once on site, two of the team were then tasked with visiting those locations and repeating the photographic survey. The topside supervisor was able to use the tracking to help guide the divers to the locations where we needed the photos to be taken. So in this photo, you can see Tom with laminated copies of the 2004 photos, identifying a position to take an updated photo. This image shows the coverage across the site we had during the course of the project. So each coloured line that you can see on the site plan represents the track of an individual diver during their dive over the course of the week. So you can see we had really good coverage across the whole site. So how did the photo survey go? Well, it was quickly apparent that visibility on site was nowhere near as good as in 2004. Jenny recalls over 10 metres of visibility on the site back in 2004. And I should say, Jenny and Simon were part of that team, and they could confirm it by going back to their diving records and actually looking at their logs from the day and comparing the visibility then, which was in over 10 metres, to sort of the 1 to 2 metres we had on site during the week we were there. I'm going to show you a few examples of the photos. Here are two of the many cannon on the site in photo position 2B. On the left is the 2004 Wessex photo, and on the right is the photo from last year. What is immediately clear is there's much more weed coverage on the site during our visit. If we look at another photo, there's 3 further guns this time in position 2C. Again, you will see dramatically more marine growth. And if you look really closely in the top right of the 2021 photo, you may be able to spot a yellow round tag. That's a survey tag that was installed by Wessex on the site back in 2004, and we could find a few of those around the site when we were there. And finally, here's a single gun in position 3A. It's immediately clear that the amount of marine growth is dramatically different. Some of this can be attributed to the time of year of the visit. Wessex were on site in May 2004, whilst we were on site in September. There will always be more marine growth later in the year. In addition, the two 2004 members were able to confirm that a lot of the marine growth was actually removed in 2004 by the team to enable the recording of features fully. However, our objectives included undertaking a baseline record of the marine growth, so we weren't able to remove any of it during our dive. These photos, though, will be a key record of the site in future, and it's hoped that future contractors and dive groups who visit the site will be able to record the same features to build up a record of change over time on the site. So an accurate site plan was developed using the analysis of the multi-beam bathymetry and the results of diving operations. Multi-beam collected in 2020 by CHERISH was used as the base map and archaeological features were marked on the plan. Ground truthing by divers allowed the plan to be updated and features orientated and stratigraphy confirmed. So we were able to go back and look at the 2004 plan as well and realign some of the canons that actually needed to be adjusted slightly in their orientation. New archaeological features were identified during diving operations, including a number of linear objects, and you can see some of those on the site plan, as well as a feature consisting of a concretion of at least 4 rings, each between 20 to 30 centimetres in diameter. And you can see it to the east of the site on the site plan, just where the arrow is there, and there's a photo of it too. The ring feature is rather interesting. Now, we actually spotted it for the first time, not on the seabed, but one evening back at our base while looking at the preliminary photogrammetry that was being processed. A couple of rings were clearly visible, but hadn't been seen by divers when they were actually on the wreck. So the next day, using the diver tracking, we were able to guide divers to the feature, and they were able to locate the rings and examine them in more detail. We'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on what they may be. Suggestions to date include part of the rigging, mast caps, bowsprit caps, or perhaps some sort of large chain related to stowing and retrieving the anchor. This is an illustration of a mast cap from Ian Cundy's Glossary of Terminology book, which does indeed seem similar to our rings. Ian has also shared this image with us recently, which is of a recovery from the site in the early 1980s. And it does indeed appear to be very similar to our mystery rings that you can see in that photo. I have no further ideas on what it is at the moment, but if anyone listening does, then I'd love to hear from you outside of this. The biggest change to recording sites since 2004, though, has really been the growth of photogrammetry. Felix Pedrotti was the member of the team responsible for collecting and processing the photogrammetry model. And I'm going to hand over to Felix on the site to explain the techniques and how it works to you.
Now I would like to do these ones. My name is Felix Pedrotti and I'm here to do a photogrammetry model of the site, which is pretty much taking a series of images which then I upload onto a software with which I can then create a photogrammetry model, which is a 3D model of the entire site. The water conditions can be quite harsh, so I usually use a GoPro to survey the site. I go underwater, turn the GoPro on, and then start swimming the site off very, very slowly. Hopefully the currents are good, so I don't have to swim too strong against the current, but I swim the site off, taking thousands and thousands of images. The positive things that we can get out of photogrammetry is that we can create a complete 3D model of the site. And the beautiful part of it is that even if we have only a few minutes on site, or in this case we have a few days, rather than sending divers down with a pencil and paper to record everything, you jump in the water and after a few half an hour we have already surveyed a big site. It also allows us to bring the site in the highest amount of accuracy onto the surface into a computer in a digital format, which then we can study but also try to understand what happened. If we do these photogrammetry models then over a few years, what this allows us to do is to understand the change of the site and to really see what has happened over an annual change on the site. Is the site still protected by the underwater environment, or has the environment changed so badly that the site is in danger?
So that was Felix talking about how we undertook the photogrammetry survey. And here is the completed model. You'll be able to see a number of the cannons and the anchors as we scroll past, as well as the large mound of marble blocks, which is at the centre of the wreck, as well as a number of the cannon and anchors. You can also see an incredible amount of weed growth across the site, which is a real challenge for photogrammetry to overcome, as the weed moves in the water column, it constantly moves, making a fixed reference point for the photogrammetry incredibly hard to get, essentially. And here's a section of the photogrammetry that I've just pulled out of that. And you may be able to spot the ring feature between the two anchors. It's up there. This model will be uploaded to the CHERISH Sketchfab account in the next few weeks if you'd like to explore it yourself. Felix is just having a final adjustment of some of the textures before we release it to the world. So in line with the aims of the CHERISH project, we wanted to really understand climate change and the effects, if any, it was having on the site. And to this end, the team undertook a baseline assessment of the site in terms of the environment and the marine species present. pH and temperature measurements were taken both daily, both on the surface and on the seabed. And prior to fieldwork, the team undertook training with Andrew Viduka, who has developed the GERT methodology in Australia. Now, GERT's a funny one. It stands for Gathering Information via Recreational and Technical Scientific Divers, and is a conservation-focused, no-impact science project. It aims to train members to systematically document things that they can see in terms of physical and natural features of historic shipwrecks, submerged aircraft, and other underwater cultural heritage that is in an open seawater environment. It aims to facilitate ongoing protection and management of sites. And the focus of the GERT Citizen Science Project is to really enable better understanding of the condition of sites and the factors driving their preservation or deterioration. Andy and the GERT team have developed a methodology and series of recording forms to try and monitor environmental change on wrecks throughout the world. It very much includes things we now do as part of our work as standard, including taking pH and temperature measurements, but also places more of an emphasis on recording the marine wildlife present. Jenny, who you can see on the right of that photo, with Jessica, took a lead on completing the GERT recording forms for the site and completing a marine species audit across it. This was further enhanced following the fieldwork when the videos were reviewed by one of our team back in the office, whose original training was in marine biology. This rapid assessment will provide a base for monitoring in future years. It was interesting as our chat with Geraint at the start of the project revealed that during the long period he was diving on the site, he increasingly observed new species coming in that he believed were from warmer waters and were making themselves known as a result of climate change. And it'd be really nice to build that up over a long period with more evidence. So over 32 different species of marine life were observed on the site. However, we think it's likely there will have been more present that were either too small to see or that were too difficult to identify using the footage alone back in the office. Recording the marine species present is a good indicator for understanding climate change, as marine species are often extremely vulnerable to even slight changes to their environment. Overall, 10 species of fish were seen, including cork-wing wrasse, tom-pot blennies, two-spotted gobies, gold sillies, bib and poor cod. Others were observed, however, confident identification couldn't be made, but we think there were also bream, cod and whiting on the site, as well as this fish, this little chap in the picture here, which it hasn't been possible to narrow down to a UK species. We think it's wrasse-shaped, and people seem to agree with us on that, and you can see it there in the picture, but if anyone in the audience has any more ideas, I'd love to hear them. Could this little fish be evidence of climate change affecting the site? We simply don't know at the moment, but it's hoped with monitoring over future years, we might start to understand more. There were quite a few species of crab and common lobster on the site, including spiny spider crab, velvet swimming crab and edible crab. And using the GoPro footage, it was possible to identify 6 types of sponge on the site, with most of these appearing on the marble blocks that were also covered with marine growth. There were 2 different species of orange sponge, one which was possibly called golf ball sponge. There was a white or pink sponge, including dead man's fingers, with one of the others thought to be the rather wonderfully named prawn cracker sponge. The boring sponge, and that's the poor sponge's name, and it's the one you can see on the slide here, the yellow sponge, was also observed on the marble blocks. And the marble blocks recovered from the site previously have shown evidence of boring marine species, and it could be that this yellow sponge is the culprit. All of the species identified during the survey are consistent with what would be expected in the area. It hasn't been possible to confirm identity of some species using the footage alone, and this fish that I've shown couldn't be identified at all. And it may be that that is a species that isn't consistent with the area, but we can't say that with certainty. In future surveys on this and other wreck sites, we think that it's a really good repeatable scientific approach that we could use to monitor the marine life, and the information collected could also be used to add to other national science initiatives such as the Marine Biological Association's the Big Seaweed Search and other sea life surveys. Changes to marine life is one of the first indicators of climate change on a wreck. And so it's really important that as marine archaeologists, we don't ignore it, but rather to learn to look at sites holistically. So we look at the marine biology alongside the archaeology. So that was our time on the site, really. But when we're back in the office, one of our team, Becky Austin, has been undertaking further research on the bronze bell that gives the site its name. Before working for us, Becky spent 10 years as the Deputy Receiver of Rec and has seen a lot of bells in her time. She was especially interested in the bell from this site, though, as it has some similarities to another bell she's been researching. And she noticed that the crown of the bell and the style of decoration is very similar in shape to those produced by the Marinelli foundry in Italy. It's a really interesting foundry. It still operates today. It was founded no later than 1339, which makes it one of the oldest family businesses still operating in Italy today, which I just think is amazing to even get your head around, that something kind of been operating for that long. The decoration is also similar on the two bells that you can see here, with triangles featured around the outside of images depicting people. On this slide, you can see the bell from the Wreck on the left and a bell from the Marinelli Foundry Museum on the right. The Marinelli bell has a very similar design to our bell. So Becky is currently in touch with the Bell Foundry in Italy and is working with them to undertake further research to see if it's possible to confirm where our bell was made. And if we can confirm the bell was made at the Marinelli Foundry, then it will be a really important step forward in helping us understand more about the wreck and perhaps even be a step towards identifying the name of the ship in future. Now, you might remember earlier on I said about Geraint Jones, who was one of the original site divers. He was really keen the next generation enjoy the site. Well, so were we, and so were Cherish. We built in a large amount of public engagement into the project, and as I mentioned at the start, our team included a dedicated video production team who pulled together daily dive diaries. And you've seen some snippets of our daily dive diaries today, but do go and look at them in full on the Cherish website. And once I finish talking, I'll probably pop that link in the chat for anybody who would like to go and visit it. We also undertook a visit to a local primary school during the fieldwork, and we were able to get all the junior children interested in the wreck and in the underwater cultural heritage surrounding them. I'd love to say that I'd taken some visits of the children enjoying things from the wreck, but unfortunately we were so busy that we only managed to get my photo of myself and Simon afterwards. We hosted a video visit by Channel 4 News, though, which formed part of a wider piece about the work of the CHERISH Project and climate change. And finally, we took along our Heritage Hive outreach trailer. You can see it there in the photos. The trailer provides a very visible focal point to a project, and perhaps more importantly, gives our divers something to do in the event of bad weather and once they return to land. Although I should say on this site, we were on site for very, very long days, and so there was very little time when we got back in the evening. It is fully equipped with information panels, though, and hands-on activities for all ages and a TV, which allowed us to play the daily dive diaries. It has onboard power, which allows the TV to run for 33 hours before it needs a charge, so it's great to take places. Thanks to the helpful harbour master and the wider team at Porthelly Marina, we were able to give the trailer a home for the week and open it as diving times allowed. We met many lovely people, including these divers you can see here who are from Southport Bezac, whom I hope we have convinced to apply for a licence to visit the site this year. Well, last year's visit is the end of our involvement with the wreck for now, but it's certainly one that we'd love to do more work on in future, as there's a lot more to be done on the site. It would be brilliant to be able to go back and look at our mystery rings in more detail, and it would be better to go at the start of the year, I think, with less marine growth present to enable us to potentially have a better look at the rings. We should soon hear from the Marinelli Foundry too about that bell, and that may help further unlock the identity of the wreck. We were able to provide a small amount of funding to Ian Cundy at the end of last year as part of our MSDS Marine Grant Awards to enable the creation of a leaflet about the wreck. Ian also has plans for signage about the wreck on the beach and a dive trail on the wreck in future, which I think would be a fabulous addition to the site and would enable more divers to enjoy the wreck and potentially even contribute to monitoring it for the effects of future climate change. It may be a protected wreck site, but applying for a licence to visit the site from CADU is free, it's really easy, and I'd urge any divers listening today to go and explore the wreck for themselves. As a maritime archaeologist, but also a mum, I always want to take my young children to work with me, which is normally a bit hard. But this wreck is so close to shore and so shallow, I think it will be the perfect site to take my young son to once he completes his junior open water later this year. So that's my plan, to get back there one way or another. I'd like to think we'll be returning to the Bronze Bell again in future. Finally, though, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has helped us during the course of the project, especially Claire Lancaster from Cherish and Ian Cundy, whose support and assistance has been gratefully received. So thank you. If you'd like to find out more about the wreck, then go and visit the museum in Barmouth. there's so much material from the wreck there to see, and it's a really, really good museum to visit. Watch out for our sketchfab models, and watch the diaries on the CHERISH website. And there's also a book about the wreck that's been published by Tom Bennett that's available at the museum. So check out all of those things, and I hope you're as interested in the wreck now as we are. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alison. I'd say your son is very lucky to be able to join his mum at work when he does get the opportunity. That was really fascinating. Diolch o galon am hwnna. It's given us a real insight into the work that you do. And I think, I mean, good weather and dolphins, you couldn't go wrong really, could you? So, and I think I mentioned earlier, if you've got a question for Alison, do put it to her via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And while Alison catches her breath, I did mention earlier that Julian Whitewright is joining us as well, he's a maritime archaeologist with the CHERISH Project. Julian, Alison mentioned there that the wreck is protected. So just give us a sense of how significant this wreck is in terms of, the history of Welsh shipwrecks. And also we saw a lot of really cutting edge techniques being used there to survey the wreck. How does this set a sort of blueprint for how we should be treating wrecks in Wales?
Thanks, Rachel. I think to pick up on the second point first, yes, basically. I mean, it just shows really in terms of what Alison's presented there across the talk, what modern maritime archaeology can do in terms of being able to take all of the technology available and sort of throw it at these sites really in a considered way to get the best of what is always limited funding. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd have, loads and loads of money and loads of archaeologists and loads of time and perfect weather conditions and all of that. And we'd be able to look at all of the wrecks in Wales and all the ones we know about, never mind the ones we haven't found yet, in a sort of equal way, if you like. So in that sense, this work on the Bronze Bell, yeah, it sets the blueprint within Welsh maritime archaeology for the types of things we should be thinking about when we're looking at these vessels, and also really demonstrates the huge amount of information that can be extracted from 5 days on site in terms of understanding the real details of what's there, setting up systems for the wrecks to be monitored in the future. And also, I think it's really important to state actually doing justice to all the work that's been done before, when people were not as blessed with the technological material and the technologies that we have now. And I think I, like Alison, have worked on a number of sites that, we've inherited these sort of archives going back decades, sometimes on sites. And often the site plans that people produced in the 1980s and 90s, and even before that, when they were diving with tape measures and compasses and trying to map everything together, are often a little bit overlooked or seen as second-class things to the photogrammetry. But actually, time and again, they are proved to be pretty accurate surveys in quite difficult sort of conditions, if you like. So I think being able to carry on working on all of these sites, it really emphasizes the value of that earlier work, and it provides a future, if you like, for that work. To go back to your first point, to think about the Bronze Bell in terms of Welsh maritime archaeology, I mean, there's only 6 protected wrecks in Welsh waters. The more informed members of the audience will realise that one of those is probably the wrong site, and the other one probably doesn't have a shipwreck there, at least the one that's protected. Anyway, there's plenty of other ships there that, in my opinion, are worth protecting. So, and this one is, I think it's really important because it just sort of fits in that spot, of the early 18th century, is sort of the world is starting to become this globalized place. It's importing this material from Italy into the UK. It's clearly quite a big ship. I know all of the earlier material published on the site talks about just the marble, but the historic chart that talks about the site, mentions the size of it. There's many 100 tons of ship. So it is a really significant site. And I think perhaps within UK maritime archaeology, it's never perhaps the publicity that it maybe deserves as a site. So I think this work, apart from setting the benchmark and the standards that we have to now think about when we're trying to deal with all of the other, hundreds of thousands, or not hundreds of thousands, thankfully, hundreds to thousands of shipwrecks. It should serve to sort of put the Bronze Bell site on the map a little bit more within the UK as well. Sorry, that's a very rambling answer as usual, but hopefully that's given Alison a chance to, take stock, stop coughing.
That's great. Thank you, Julian. And it's great to see also members of the audience are getting in touch. And Alison, we have had a suggestion as to what the mystery rings could be. So Wilma is suggesting that it could be a mast band connecting a spar to a mast. I wonder what you think about that as a suggestion.
I think a mast band was one of the suggestions I potentially said I meant to say. Certainly if I didn't say it could well be. There's a lot of the rings down there, and I think we need to go back and look at them, or somebody needs to go back and look at them in more detail. They were really interesting because they just weren't obvious during the diving. It was literally looking at the photogrammetry being processed that enabled us to see them. But there's so much more about the wreck that does need to be looked at. And I just want to pick up on something Julian said about the site plan, the earlier site plan that the KNEST group had done. It was incredibly accurate, and hats off to them. They did an absolutely brilliant bit of work on that wreck, both surveying it, but also in terms of all the conservation they did on the artifacts. We may be sort of 30, 40 years later and techniques have changed, but it doesn't stop the fact that they did a cracking job.
Kevin is asking, and this is something that obviously you mentioned in the talk, he's asking, why was visibility so much worse, in your opinion, than it was in 2004?
I think there's probably a few factors at play. It's later in the year, so there was more marine growth, definitely, and ideally we would have been on site earlier in the year, but the way the contract worked and everything, it was later by the time we got there. However, talking to local divers as well, it's very close into land is the site, the wreck, and it had rained for the 2 weeks before we sort of went to site. So if you think of all the water that's coming down from the mountains and coming out to sea sort of in the 2 weeks prior to field work, Ian's got a theory that you need a period of dry weather for 2 weeks prior to field work to have good visibility on the site. And unfortunately, you can't guarantee the weather, can you? And the weather was good when we were there, but the 2 weeks before were atrocious.
Yeah, well, it's not something where, there's a reason Wales is so green, we get a lot of rain. There's quite a few people asking similar questions about the metal artifacts. So Calvin, for example, is asking, will the metal artifacts stay where they are, forever in perpetuity?
Well, I don't think there's any plans to lift any of the cannons and anchors. The cost of recovery would be huge. They're fairly stable on the seabed. I mean, metal's never going to last underwater forever, but we have a lovely record of it now, and it's going to last an awfully lot longer than if we brought it up and left it on land without doing anything to it. So there's no plans to recover any material from the site as far as I'm aware. I think you're muted, Rachel.
Sorry. Another question as to whether you could ascertain what direction the ship was travelling in, or how she sank, just based on what you've been able to see.
Could we tell what direction it was travelling in? And sort of, no, at the moment we don't have the answers to that at all. And I think it's fairly unlikely, given the remains that are on the seabed, we're going to be able to answer that at the moment. It may be that more historical or archival research can answer that question further down the line. I'd like to think that if we do get further in identifying where the bell was cast at which foundry, it may lead us to the ship that it was on, and there may be more answers there about what the ship was doing, where it was. There's so many theories about how it got there. Ultimately, we may never know.
I'll ask Julian. It's intriguing, isn't it, that there's so many questions, still unanswered, and that this sense of mystery is really what, is fascinating about this kind of work, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, really, why people love shipwrecks so much. I mean, we know a lot about this site. I mean, You know, we know what the main cargo is. We know it's an armed ship. The historical material that has been turned up over the years, particularly, there's an amazing chart, one of Lewis Morris's, who was a North Walian or from Anglesey cartographer, marine cartographer, who mapped the Welsh coast in huge detail before anybody else had, in the mid sort of 1740s. And his notebooks for this area sort of record the fact that this was a Genoese vessel of, I always get the tonnage wrong, 700 tons, I think, carrying marble and paper. So, and it was lost in 1709. So, I mean, unlike so many ships, we know just from that one little note a huge amount about it. And it's unlikely that there were two ships carrying marble lost in exactly the same place, both with this date. And yet, as you've said, it does bring up all of these other questions about where was it going and that kind of thing. And it's been quite strongly linked with St. Paul's Cathedral and the very, very end phases of construction with that in terms of the marble. I've never heard anybody, I find it really interesting actually, that there's always a focus on the marble because that's what survives. Nobody ever talks about the paper. Who was ordering 400 tons of paper in 1709 or something like that? Maybe this was the hymn books for St. Paul's Cathedral or something like that. But there just are all of these stories that get sort of bound up in it, and even, you know, suggestions of the ship being then dismantled on the site because it's not in a huge water depth there, so some of it was probably upstanding, and being able to dismantle it and salvage it and reuse the ship timbers in local buildings and that kind of thing. And these are all things that we know have happened, you know, all around the coast of Britain and in Wales in particular. You can go out and find ship's timbers in buildings relatively easily. But to be able to sort of tie all of that together into this one event and to be able to pull all of the different stories about it out, yeah, it speaks to lots and lots of different things. Somebody'd asked in the chat there about the guns. You know, why is a ship carrying marble carrying so many guns? And I think it's really a sign of the times, if you like, that at that point in time, ships sailing from somewhere like Italy had to sail out of the Mediterranean past the Barbary coast and the pirates there, and were, you know, subject to just being attacked. A lot of the rules that we think about today as governing the sea just didn't exist, or people just ignored them. And there's these other accounts of, I think there's one ship that was set out and the French captured it, and then the English captured it off the French, and then somebody else captured it off the English, and these things change hands on the course of a single voyage. So yeah, they were armed for a good reason at this point in time, you know, as much to deter people maybe as if they were ever actually used in anger.
Thanks for that, Julian. I should mention to both of you, we're getting some excellent feedback from the audience, that people have really enjoyed the talk. So that's really good to know. Alison, Helen is asking if there are any other artifacts on the seabed, so apart from those that you've already mentioned.
Yeah. So in terms of what you can see, the easy to see things are the big things. So the cannons, the anchors, the rings, and obviously the marble. Now, we believe there's actually quite a lot of other artifacts left on the site, but they're incredibly buried, and it wasn't part of our brief to start digging holes and finding things on site. We were very much looking at the exposed archaeology. Having spoken to Geraint, he thinks there's an awful lot of material that they left on site. So where they found sort of 5 of the same artifact, they'd only take 2 for the museum and leave the rest buried on the site. So I think there's a lot more down there, it's just not immediately visible. And that's why sites like that need monitoring regularly, because who knows when you get a storm what is exposed, and material does still seem to wash up on the beach. People told us quite a lot about that when we were down there. So it's quite likely that material is being sort of washed off the site onto the beach over time.
Now, you mentioned in the talk, obviously, that the purpose of this is to really look at the effect of climate change, you know, on the wreck, and to give that as an indication of what's going on. So Barbara is asking if you have any more information about the mystery fish.
I'm afraid I don't. We literally have that one snippet of the picture that I showed you. You can see it on the GoPro. There's a bit more, sort of, it obviously moves, but that's the best shot of it. But we just think it's unusual, and no two people have given me the same identity of the fish as well. I've done a bit of a plea on Twitter to sort of marine biologists and sort of the marine biology community. There doesn't seem to be a consensus over what it is at all. And I just think it's interesting, and over time, surveys like this, actually looking at sort of the species that are present, are going to be the key to understanding climate change on the site, because they are the first indicators of things changing.
And Julian, maybe give us a sense of what happens next. So we've got all this information, and I think there were thousands of photographs that were taken by Alison and the team when they did visit the wreck, so which is a brilliant, library now to have, isn't it, for years and years to come. But what happens to the information that's been gathered so far?
I think we go and get some money and do it again, is the short answer. I mean, yeah, that's a kind of yeah, it is a joke, but it's not, because like all of these things, if you put the time and the effort and to some extent the money into establishing the baseline that is there on such an important site, all of that effort is wasted if you don't then go and do it again. The difficulty and the real kind of crunch with it all is working out how often to go back and do the monitoring. And that for archaeological sites now, I mean, that is our biggest headache in a way. They are, particularly the maritime ones, be they underwater in shallow water like this one, or further offshore in really, really deep water, or on a beach in the intertidal zone. They're, if you like, on the front line of climate change and storminess and changes to ocean acidification and all of these types of things. So we have to monitor them. And as Alison said, we have a, our guiding principle is to leave stuff where it is, so that people can hopefully be able to understand it better in the future, and they've got even better technology to throw at it. But that doesn't just mean leaving it there and ignoring it. We've got a sort of a duty to try and go and monitor these things. So, I mean, I think one of the real things to come out from this work is that a lot of the artifacts on this site, despite its shallowness, haven't moved a huge amount in the last 15, 16 years since the Wessex work. And you can see that really, really clearly. Everything is in roughly the same orientation. And that's borne out both through the site plans and, something as simple as just taking a photograph from the same place each time, which seems, when you've got all of this other technology, that it's a really simple thing to do, but it actually works really, really well. So the answer is really to sort of archive this data along with the material from 2006 and all of the sort of the main site archive. And I guess over time to work through that to check, was it the same to 2004, 2005? Fine. What about the 90s and the 80s and so on? And looking at initially at the site plans, that is the case. But then to try and go back in, maybe a couple of years in the first instance, to take some more photos at those specific points which are now set up. And as was demonstrated so well in the talk, you can put your divers straight onto those points now with the dive position. They don't have to swim around wondering, is this the right cannon or is this the right place? You can go right there. Maybe potentially in the future, we can just put an ROV down to go and take those, a little small one to take those pictures. So the process of the monitoring becomes more and more efficient each time. And at that point, you can sort of sit and go, well, maybe we've been back 2 years later and it's fine. So we leave it 3 years this time, or 4 years or 5 years. And applying that process to all of the vessels that we have around the Welsh coast means that you can start to understand how frequently you need to go to these sites. And, we should not forget that this is one of only half a dozen sites in Wales that are given, statutory designation. So by those standards alone, it's in the top 6 of sites. And as I've said, 2 of them, for whatever reason, it's a different site or there's not much there. So, you can put it into a higher bracket than that. So the answer is to work out the most effective and efficient and to some extent sustainable way of repeating this monitoring. While I'm speaking, I just picked up on something in the chat again that Joe had said about the mass bands. If they are mass bands, if the ship was salvaged, there wouldn't be any there. And it's possible that if they are part of the rigging, they were in a store or something like that down below decks. The HMS Invincible site in the Solent is a really great example of a site that was salvaged and rescued, actually, much of the material on it over a fortnight once it grounded. But the excavation of it has still turned up huge amounts of rigging material that was all stored below deck. So a lot of these ships had spares of everything on board. So while the stuff that was in use might have been washed away, there's still huge amounts of information to be recovered from the stuff that's really, really low down in the ship and is what's probably, well, hopefully still preserved.
Thanks for that, Julian. I think we've got time for maybe just a couple more questions. So Julian mentioned the technology that was used there, but Alison, Stephen is asking, you said that this wreck is in reasonably shallow water, but does the technology that you use, could you use that in much deeper water?
We could absolutely use it in deeper. It's just this site happened to be shallower. While I'm sort of talking, I'm just going to mention one thing to just come back on something Julian said, and to talk about climate change again. We were really lucky after fieldwork. The boat skipper put us in touch with a diver who dives the North Wales coast really regularly, and he has handed me a big box of VHS cassettes of underwater footage from the site that was taken in the 80s and 90s. And I think there's a real opportunity to look at them and actually do some desk-based work to sort of see what species you can see and what the marine life looks like, and do some comparison with these historical video footage. I'm in a bit of a sort of conundrum at the moment because they're on VHS and I don't have a VHS video player, but there are plans afoot that we will be able to actually look at that footage, because I think that's going to be really important as well, at comparing the site now with how it was 30 years ago.
We should never throw anything out. It's always going to come in handy, CDs and VHSs. So just in terms of the discoveries that you've made, and when your research, when it is published, it'll be presumably available on the CHERISH and the Royal Commission's website, because we've got quite a few people asking where they can find out more information.
Yeah, so I've already put a link in the chat to the CHERISH website where our blogs and the video diaries are. The model will be on Sketchfab in the next couple of weeks. Felix is just being a bit picky about his textures at the moment, and once he's happy with it, we'll get that uploaded. The report should be with CHERISH in the next few weeks as well, and hopefully at some point that'll be online. And the archive will be going to the Royal Commission as well, and we're just preparing the archive to deposit with all of the photos and video footage and everything else.
I think that's a really good spot to leave it. We probably could have talked for another hour easily, but thank you so much, Alison and Julian as well. Diolch o galon am sesiwn yna. Mae gwefan CHERISH, fel nath Alison sôn, yn cynnwys yr holl newyddion diweddaraf am y prosiect. Check out the CHERISH website for all the latest news about events and discoveries. And if you'd like to find out more about our study of the Bronze Bell, you can search for the CHERISH YouTube channel, where you can view the dive diaries, which Alison mentioned in her talk as well. You can also go to the Royal Commission's website to find out about the latest job vacancies, and also there's a special offer there on a current publication, Cymru ar Môr, Wales and the Sea. But for me now, and from Alison and Julian, diolch o galon am ymuno gyda ni. Thanks again to Alison and to Julian, and thank you for your company.